Hello. Well, many of us have quite a bit of time on our hands, don't we? So how about a little Shakespeare? Well, I have to tell you all that I got a ticking off from a lady called Deb and someone else called Strake. The comments under my last video about President Trump and the bleach. Deb says that she's sick to death of hearing about the virus, the SJWs, the left and the TDS crowd. My bad, she says, just needed a break. And, no need to apologise, Deb. I know how you feel. And Strake accuses me, or the content at least, of becoming tiresome. And again, now I'm going to spice it up with a little bit of Shakespeare. So how about that? Coronavirus and Shakespeare. You see, you can't ignore the coronavirus, at least I can't. What else is there to talk about it? I'm reminded of it daily. My hair is sticking out all over the place, and every time I look at my hands, I see my nails. I've never seen them so long. You see, I'm not riding, so I'm not breaking my nails on hay bales and tack buckles. So instead of being out in the fresh air, surrounded by the delicate aroma of horse poo, I'm spending my days like some Morlock in the darkness of the garage, cleaning out years of detritus instead. And that's all down to the coronavirus. So how can I not talk about it? So I'm going to be talking about it some more here, but I can promise you there won't be anyone else on the internet who's drawing a parallel between Iago and the MSM. I'm pretty sure I could bet on that one. So perhaps you'll indulge me a little bit. And here you'll see these two pages. They're from the BBC and from the Daily Mail. You can't see that so clearly because I put the page onto reader view because, well, especially with the Daily Mail, it was almost unreadable for adverts flashing up all over the place. So I'll start with the BBC. It says here, coronavirus outcry after Trump suggests injecting disinfectant as treatment. He did no such thing. He never, ever suggested that. He was speculating about the possibility of somehow getting a type of disinfectant or something like it into the body somehow. And then he suggested that maybe someone could do research on that. That's the BBC headline. And then it says, US President Donald Trump has been lambasted by the medical community after suggesting research. This is slightly different, isn't it? Into whether coronavirus might be treated by injecting disinfectant into the body. Okay, so that's suggesting research he was talking about, but that's not what the headline says. So they've subtly changed the direction of the discussion. And then it says what he actually says. And then it goes back to saying that disinfectants don't work inside the body and all the rest of it. So again, undercutting the original meaning of the idea that Trump was kicking around. Now, what Trump said made very little scientific sense, but it was a reasonable idea from someone who obviously knows very little about the way medicines work. And why should he? He's been concentrating on other things throughout his life, like building hotels and making bucket loads of money out of them. Something for which most of his critics have very little aptitude, and who would be just as flummoxed by a question about quantities of cement in the foundations of a mega building as Trump is about medical issues. So all he actually said was, let's hope that doctors can come up with something that will work, which is, in effect, what all of us are saying. And what I want to draw your attention to, dear viewer, is the way the press are implying something without actually saying it and then retracting their argument, but leaving you with an entirely false impression. Here we have the Daily Mail headline. Trump takes no responsibility for spike in people. Yes, that's one editor who should go back to school. You know what? Gets worse a little lower down, but let's press on. Trump takes no responsibility for spike in people ingesting disinfectant as coronavirus treatment. Nowhere in the article does it then say anyone ingested disinfectant. What they say here is that people are calling medical authorities to ask about the subject of disinfectant. But, well, anyone who actually swallows disinfectant because the president has speculated about some sort of treatment with some sort of disinfectant, that's obviously the same sort of person who would ram his head into the brick wall on platform 9 of King's Cross Station because J.K. Rowling said there was a platform 9 3/4 there. Would you say that Rowling would then be to blame for the injuries sustained in such an attempt? And I have to remind you that the only people who actually did say that the president advised drinking bleach or whatever was the press. Illinois has reported. Illinois? Is there an editor in the House? Obviously not there. Illinois has also reported calls to poison control after Trump pondered last week whether disinfectant could be used by injection. So you see, it says people were calling poison control. It didn't say that anyone was actually swallowing the stuff. Oh, also, I wouldn't actually put it past some Democrat activists to ring poison control anyway, just to troll the issue. And they say Trump pondered on how disinfectant may be used, but they're acting as if he gave that advice. And watching the whole thing develop, I've been strongly reminded of the Shakespeare play Othello. And before anyone in Britain decides to switch off thinking I'm just talking about Trump, I want to say they're doing the same thing with Boris Johnson, only slightly nastier because they've been having a go at his baby. However, let's get back to Othello, because there's a famous and well-studied scene in which Iago whips Othello up into a frenzy of doubt about the fidelity of his wife, and all the time saying that that is exactly what he's not telling him. It starts with Iago telling the audience that he hates Othello, swarthy man bad, and he will do anything in his power to bring him down. Why, you may ask? Well, the reasons change every 10 minutes, but the fact is he just wants to bring Othello down, and he thinks up new excuses for his actions all the time. That's his direction, and it's very similar to the way the media are behaving with regard to Trump. They just want to bring Trump down, and their reasons change every 10 minutes. He's in cahoots with Russia. He's in cahoots with China. He's a dodgy businessman. He consults with prostitutes. He says uncouth things. He speculates about disinfectant. Anything. So back to Shakespeare. After Iago tells the audience of his plans, he then gets to work. He starts off by, just chatting casually to his master. Oh, by the way, I want to point something out before I start. Othello always calls Iago thou. You use the word thou only in 3 contexts at that time. Well, at any time when thou was a currency. You use the word when you're talking to a very close friend or a relative, one of around the same age or younger, you use it when you're a master talking to a servant, or someone of superior rank talking to an inferior, or you use the word thou when talking to God. I always thought it was sort of ironic that whereas Othello starts off by using the word thou as a familiar pronoun to an inferior, later on he starts using it as one would to a friend. By Act 5, for instance, he talks about Iago in the following way: "O brave Iago, honest and just, that hast such noble sense of thy friend's wrong, thou teachest me." So his relationship with Iago has undergone a change, because that "thou teachest me" is not only the sort of thou you talk about to a friend, it's the sort of thing you'd say when you were praying. So, Iago has sort of become a demonic god to Othello. But that's entirely beside the point, because I'm not talking about that edge of the subject. It's just something that always interested me. Iago always addresses Othello, though, as you. That's the respectful form. It's how a servant should talk to a master. Iago is always very respectful. Iago's wife Emilia calls Othello thou very frequently, which just shows what she thinks of him. Whereas, by the way, she talks to her husband Iago using the word you, which is what you'd talk to a master or a stranger. I'm sure you could write a paper on that, and it's, as I say, not much to do with what I'm talking about. It's just interesting, and the significance wouldn't have been lost on the audience in Shakespeare's time. It slips past us now. Anyway, back to the way Iago uses implication and insinuation to make something true that isn't, all the time speaking to Othello very respectfully, as if he really had his interests at heart. He starts in this way, Iago. So he's, set the scene again. He's just chatting to Othello, and then he suddenly blurts out, "Men should be what they seem, or those that be not, would they might seem none." And Othello says, "Certain men should be what they seem." And then Iago, after a pregnant pause, says, "Why then? I think Cassio's an honest man." Cassio is Othello's friend. He was his lieutenant, and he'd got the job that Iago wanted. But he was a big pal of Othello's, but nobody had brought up the subject of Cassio before this conversation. So it seemed a little strange. And then Othello responds, "Nay, there's more in this. I prithee, speak to me as to thy thinkings." Like, why are you saying this? Why are you trying to reassure me? What are you reassuring me about? "As thou dost ruminate and give thy worst of thoughts, the worst of words." Just come on, spit it out. What's the bad thing here? Iago says, "Oh, good my lord, pardon me. Though I am bound to every act of duty, I'm not bound to that all slaves are free to. Utter my thoughts? Why, say they are vile and false." So, what he's saying is, even a slave is allowed to keep his thoughts to himself. I can't be forced to give my sleaziest thoughts to you, and I don't want to do that. And then, of course, he waits for Othello to push him, and then he proceeds thus: "I do beseech you, though I perchance am vicious in my guess, maybe I'm looking at this the wrong way. As I confess, it is my nature's plague. That's a fault I have. I look at the bad side of people. To spy into abuses, and off my jealousy shapes faults that are not. And that your wisdom from one that so imperfectly conceits would take no notice. So what he's saying here is that he sometimes sees nastiness and faults in people where an honest, wise and measured man like Othello wouldn't see a problem. And he's whipping Othello up into a frenzy of doubt. What's he missing that Iago can see so clearly? Othello says, "What dost thou mean?" And then Iago launches into his attack. Good name in man and woman, dear my lord, is the immediate jewel of their souls. Look what he's doing here. Imagine I'm talking to you and, beating about the bush in a puzzling sort of way, talking about other people acting badly, but you not noticing it because you're so, innocent and good-natured. And then I suddenly blurt out, "Reputation's very valuable, isn't it?" Now, remember, at that time, a man's reputation could be completely destroyed by an unfaithful wife. It wasn't just a matter of sexual jealousy, but if society became aware that a man couldn't control his own wife, then society would come to the conclusion that he couldn't control anything and that he wasn't up to the job of holding any position of authority over anyone. You've got to remember that would be like a sort of viper coiled at the back of the minds of almost every man at that time, just ready to strike. If there was the slightest hint that his wife wasn't behaving honourably, it wouldn't just be a matter of, personal feelings. It would destroy his standing in society. So, Iago says, "A good name in man and woman, dear my lord, is the immediate jewel of their souls. Who steals my purse steals trash. 'Tis something, nothing. 'Twas mine, 'tis his, and has been slave to thousands. But he that filches from me my good name robs me of that which not enriches him and makes me poor indeed." Okay, so he's prepared the ground, and immediately Othello is very, very wary. He says, "I'll know thy thoughts." And then Iago replies, you cannot. If my heart were in your hand, nor shall not, whilst 'tis in my custody." So, there's the backtracking. Wild horses wouldn't drag it out of me. Even if you actually had my heart in your hand, I wouldn't say anything, and certainly not while it's still in my chest. And then the final blow. "Oh, beware, my lord, of jealousy. It is the green-eyed monster which doth mock the meat it feeds on." And then he uses a really dreadful word. The one word that no man in Shakespeare's time would ever want to hear. Cuckold. Just about the worst thing you could say to a man at that time. Iago says, "That cuckold lives in bliss, who, certain of his fate, loves not his wronger. But oh, what damned minutes tells he o'er, who dotes, yet doubts, suspects, yet soundly loves." Yeah, what he's saying is, well, being a cuckold isn't too bad if you can't stand the sight of your wife. And you absolutely know what she's doing anyway. But you would be in absolute hell if you love her and you're not sure and you can't trust her. And he could also be talking about Cassio, because Cassio and Othello were friends. As I said, that's how Cassio got the job as lieutenant. And he could be saying that it's not too bad if you hate your wife's lover, But it's pretty stinking if the man who's betraying you also happens to be your friend and the chap you promoted. Anyway, I'm not going any further into the rest of that. You want to know what happens, you'll have to read the play for yourself. But that little interchange is a masterclass in how someone can feed a story or half of a story and then retract it and then feed it again. And that's exactly what's going on here with Trump. I don't think Trump was being sarcastic, by the way. I think he was speculating, but he wasn't doing any more than speculating. He briefly addressed the matter when asked about Maryland Governor Larry Hogan's statement that his state was flooded with calls to emergency hotlines from people asking about disinfectant. First of all, that doesn't mean anyone actually took disinfectant. It means they were asking about it. And secondly, he says, I can't imagine why, or something like that anyway. Sorry about my American accent. Which is definitely sarcastic, that's for sure, because he knows as well as we all do that no one would have been talking about disinfectant as a cure for coronavirus without the MSM whipping up that false story. Probed about whether or not he takes responsibility, POTUS followed up, no, I don't. And no, he should not, because the responsibility lies with the press, who have made up this story, inserting it into the conversation because they want to make up a narrative. And there you are. That's how Shakespeare is relevant to today's news. And I hope whoever doesn't want to hear any more about the coronavirus will forgive me. If you want to donate or contact, the information will be rolling over the Graniopteryx as I speak. Please like, subscribe and share because it does help with the algorithm. If you visit my channel on YouTube and one day discover that I've disappeared without warning, you'll still find me on Bitchute or Minds. Just go to either of those platforms and do a search for Graniopteryx. If you're already watching this on Bitchute or Minds, good for you. Meanwhile, if you're watching this on YouTube, remember that you must keep checking the subscribe and bell icons because occasionally they reset. Till next time.